Good morning, everyone. This is Minal Katarnikar, Director, Center for Extramural Studies, University of Mumbai. It gives me immense pleasure in welcoming each and everyone to this special lecture on the makers of Ellora, and our renowned speaker, Dr. Deepak Kannal, is present in our audience, in our seminar room. I introduce my team. We are doing this lecture series in association with Pradaya, the consultancy for heritage management based in Pune, and the director of Pradaya, Mr. Anand Kanetkar, is here. Good morning, Anand, and welcome to you. May I request you to say a few words about Pradaya? You are muted.
Yeah, Pradaya Heritage Management Services is a company giving consultancy in heritage management. We do organize different site seminars, educational programs, workshops, etc. Recently, since March, we have started online certificate courses. We conducted a lecture series on ancient trade and trade routes in India and Asia, then on Harappan civilization recently, a workshop on Indian ceramics. The ceramics in Indian archaeology is ongoing, and we are glad to collaborate with the Department of Center for Extramural Studies, University of Mumbai, to carry out this, introduction to archaeology online lecture series. And we are also glad that Dr. Deepak Kannal has graciously agreed to deliver his lecture. And it's not a common lecture which he is going to talk about Ellora, but he is going to talk about the makers of Kailasanatha, which is an interesting topic for us. So I thank him also for suggesting this topic for this lecture series, which has actually taken this to a different dimension. So over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Anand. Along with us, there is Dr. Prachi Moghe, my colleague in the Center for Extramural Studies, University of Mumbai. She is the assistant professor in University of Mumbai. So welcome, Dr. Prachi, and I'm sure we are going to have great time. So audience, let me take this privilege to introduce Dr. Deepak Kannal here. Dr. Deepak Kannal is a renowned Indian art historian, sculptor, and former dean and head of the Department of Art History and Aesthetics, Faculty of Fine Arts, Maharaja Sayajirao University of Baroda, Gujarat. He is a specialist on the Ellora caves, on which he has written several influential art research papers, and he has delivered numerous lectures on the same. During this lecture, he will talk about the sculptures of Kailasha Cave at the World Heritage Site of Ellora from Maharashtra. So, Dr. Kannal, hearty welcome to University of Mumbai, and the Center for Extramural Studies, as you must be knowing, is a very unique center in the University of Mumbai, which is committed to the open learning, or I will say education beyond the walls. So with this motto in our mind and as our mission, we conduct many activities which nurture the special interests of the people of different age groups. So children are not a bar to us, as well as very senior people are also most welcome to our activities. We have our regular courses in gardening and landscape, astronomy, numismatics and epigraphy, and very specially archaeology and many activities related to archaeology. For archaeology, we have courses at different levels, that is certificate course, advanced course, and also MA program. With this view in mind, to keep the interests of people, maintain their interests, we conduct many activities like guest lectures, small workshops, crash courses related to all these subjects. And this is a special online lecture series. We are taking the advantage of our lockdown period, and we are trying to reach to as many people possible because they are at home. So we want them to utilize their time in very constructive activities. And with this, mission in our mind, we have organized this online lecture series, which will be there till next Wednesday. In this series, Today we have a very special guest, Professor Dr. Kannal. And now, without standing much in between you and him, I request him to kindly begin his most awaited session on the makers of Kailasha. Thank you. Thank you very much. Over to Dr.
Dr.
Kannal.
Kannal, you'll have to unmute. And just with your permission, if I can just make one announcement to everyone, Dr. Kannal, that Dr. Kannal will deliver the lecture from 10 to 11, and then we have half an hour for Q&A session. From request, with the request from some participants, I have not activated the chat to everyone. So whatever you type in chat will come to me as a host. So from 11 to 11:30, you can type your questions, and we will take, we'll moderate those questions, and we'll have a question answer session from 11 to 11:30. Yeah. So Dr. Kannal, I request you to kindly begin your lecture.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kanetkar. And good morning to everybody. The office bearers of Pradaya and other friends. I don't think it is a very good idea to start the lecture with apologies, but I think I'm compelled to apologize for two things. One, that I'm new to this medium, and if some glitch occurs in my presentation, kindly excuse me. The other apology is about the lecture itself. I have been talking about Ellora and Kailash since so many years. I have written on it. So it is quite likely that some of my ideas will be repeated in this lecture also. The people who have heard me before, the people who have read my writing should excuse me for that, but I'm trying to present some new things which we have discovered recently in this lecture. So instead of talking about the iconography, the patronage, the period, or the chronology of Kailash Natha, I chose to talk about the makers of Kailash because recently me and my young colleague, Dr. Kanika Gupta, we worked on a book which is about the unknown masters in ancient Indian art. So I will focus this lecture on the masters who perhaps worked on this great monument. So to begin with, I must tell you one more thing, that Kailash Nath, though, is not in continuation with the early phase of Ellora. It comes much later after a hiatus. But still, it is not possible to study Kailash in isolation. We'll have to study Kailash in the context of the earlier phase. And that is why, please allow me a few minutes to talk about the early phase of Ellora, and then we'll switch over to Kailash Nath. Kailash is one of the most debatable monuments. It is an enigma in the real sense. I always say that I say that it is an art historical problem incarnate. There are so many issues which are contentious, like patronage of Kailash. There is a big issue whether it has been authored by Krishna, Rashtrakuta, or Danti Durga. Some people give the credit to Danti Durga. Some of the records, including some Rashtrakuta records, attribute this monument to Krishna. But we are not very sure about this attribution. Let us try to find out if we can reach some conclusion towards the end of this session. The period and chronology, we are fairly clear about it, except the duration of the activity at this monument. Nobody would place this monument before 750 AD, but some of the scholars believe in prolonged chronology and think that it went on till 11th century. I personally feel that by 850, from 850, from 750, it must have come to a seizure in a period of 100 or 125 years. The carving techniques are different. We'll talk about it while talking about the sculpture. The carving sequence has been discussed in details by Dr. Soundararajan. There are some curious theories that some of the scholars believed that the central temple was that Kailash has been carved from a living rock. And some believe that a huge trench was carved around the central block. And after separating the central block, the temple was carved in it. Now you can imagine that if a trench of this depth, you know that the length of the temple is 200 feet, the height is 95 feet. So digging out a trench of this size is an impossibility, and taking out the debris from that trench would have been a further impossibility. So that is not a dependable contention. I think what Dr. Soundararajan says, that they started carving it from the top and gradually reached towards the Gopur. About the styles, we can see several styles in this monument, and we'll discuss about them during this session. Also the regional lineages, which need to be discussed in details while talking about Kailashnath. Most importantly, in this particular session, I want to concentrate on the masters of Kailasha. I am trying to attribute this monument to certain specific masters. So, as I said, let's start with early phase of Ellora. We'll rush through it. Normally, the Vaishnava caves near the waterfall before cave number 29 are considered to be the earliest carvings at Ellora, including Dr. Spink believe that the Ellora activity started there. Now they are Vaishnava caves, but every scholar is pretty aware of the fact that originally they must be Buddhist caves. They show a marked consanguinity with Ajanta, and on that basis they place it at a very early date. The sculpture obviously is added later. The early Buddhist caves from cave number 2 onwards till cave number 12 can also be considered as the early phase, because perhaps that is the major activity that started at Ellora. Early Hindu Pashupata caves like cave number 15, cave number 21, cave number 17, these two are from the first phase of Ellora, and the evolution of the early Buddhist caves and early Hindu caves is fairly consistent. So we'll be talking about it. The people who have some background in art history and Indology must be aware of the dates and the evolution of these caves. We can't afford spending more time on it. What I'm trying to bring home at this juncture is the problem of Chalukya conquest. According to the Mahakuta inscription, it is mentioned that Mangalesha, the Chalukya ruler, defeated Buddharaja, the Kalachuri ruler, sometime around 597 to 599. We are not exactly aware of the date, but somewhere in between these two dates, Kalachuris were defeated at the hands of Chalukyans, and the northern Maharashtra was under the Chalukyan rule after that. If we try to place Dhumarlena, cave number 29, at a specific date, it will have to be placed after Elephanta. And the date which has been generally accepted for Elephanta is 580 AD. So this particular cave, considering the marked influence of Elephanta on these caves, can be placed sometime after 590, which means that when the work at this cave was going on, the Chalukyan conquest took place, and it is quite likely that the work came to a standstill at that juncture. Considering this possibility, if we look at the sculpture of cave number 29, we find some very interesting facts. Now, the work perhaps resumed after a couple of decades because the Chalukyans are also of the same faith, and probably they may not have left the cave incomplete, and with the help of some local carvers, because after the work was stopped at Dhumarlena, the carvers must have left the place. So whoever were present over there, with their help, perhaps the work was resumed sometime in the first couple of decades of 6th century. And it must have been completed by 630 CE. This is a contention. This is a possible date. The major Buddhist activity also seems to have come to a standstill by the same date, or a couple of decades more. If we are talking about the last Buddhist activity in Ellora, that will be cave number 11 and 12. So it seems that cave number 10, which appears to be a very advanced cave, may not be much later than Rameshwara cave, that is cave number 21, because the cave 21 sculpture shows a marked similarity with the sculpture of cave 10. And it is quite possible that the carvers of cave 21 came to cave 10 and completed that cave. The activity perhaps continued for some time more, but probably because of the waning patronage, because the Buddhist activity at Ellora starts very impetuously. There's a lot of activity at Ellora, but because of the waning patronage, the work must have came to a standstill, And probably some of the caves were left incomplete, including cave number 50. So again, there is a hiatus. From 650 onwards, there must have been a hiatus at Ellora. No major work is going on in this complex. Now, keeping this in mind, we'll actually shift to the site. This is Dumarlena. The people who are not conversant with Ellora must be told that this is one of the most ambitious caves of Ellora, and it is a typical Pashupata cave which borrows a lot from Elephanta, including the Sarvato Bhadrika in the center. Sarvato Bhadrika is a Pashupata shrine which has 4 doors on all the 4 sides, on the all cardinal directions, and the Shivalinga is placed in between. Even the sculptural program is not very different than the Elephanta cave. When we enter into this cave, we notice, as I mentioned earlier, the similarity between Elephanta and Dumarlena. If you see the sculpture, and if you have seen Elephanta sculpture, one may not hesitate to compare this sculpture with Elephanta with a slightly lesser quality. The elegance of Elephanta has not totally reached at Dumarlena, but we may not rate this sculpture as much lesser sculpture. It is reasonably good. There are a couple of other sculptures also, which too can be compared, though they cannot rival Elephanta quality, but they can be compared with the quality of Elephanta, and one of them is this Parvati Parinay or Kalyana Sundara, where Shiva is accepting Parvati's hand. Now see, the gesture, the composition is quite like Elephanta, and most importantly, if you see the quality of carving, these Dikpalas, I think they rival the beauty of Elephanta. They are almost as good as Elephanta, and the activation of space, which is a very important quality of Deccan sculpture of the Western Indian Guild, can be seen over here. You can see that the images are almost emerging out of the stone. Now, this quality is totally lost in the later sculpture. Now, see this sculpture, which perhaps is one of the most hackneyed sculptures in Ellora. See the way the hands are emerging out from the shoulder, the body proportions of Nataraja, and particularly the Dikpalas, which are stuck to the wall, unlike the ones which we saw earlier. Now compare those Dikpalas with this, and imagine that they are in the same monument, they are in the same cave, which is very difficult to believe. See this sculpture, where Shiva is almost like a dwarf, and the lower part of his body is so short that he may not be able to stand on his feet. So this loss of quality must be having some reasons. And that is why I propose that the work was stopped for a couple of decades and it restarted with the available artisans. And perhaps no classy artisans were available in this vicinity, and probably they had to accept whatever they found in this region. Now we are shifting to the Buddhist caves. This is from cave number 12, and you know that there is a row of Manushi Buddhas and Dhyani Buddhas in cave number 12. Now here also you can see that the quality of sculpture is excellent. It is comparable to any great sculpture in the country. And this can be seen in continuation with Ajanta and early Ellora. The people who have seen Ajanta and the people who are conversant with the language of Ajanta sculpture will immediately notice that, like some of the sculpture from cave number 19 and 26 from Ajanta, the stags at the base of that pedestal are coming out of the sculpture. They are encroaching into the space of the viewer. This kind of extension, I call it environmental sculpture. They are extending into your space. They are extending into real space, not in the pictorial space, and which shows its, which proves its lineage to Ajanta. Now, after this sculpture, we find something extremely unexpected in the Buddhist caves also. Now, as I said, that the work in the Buddhist caves must have stopped sometime around 650 AD. The Vajrayana sculpture can be seen even in the early caves of Ellora. You can see you can see Tara images, you can see Mahamayuri images. But from 700 CE, it seems that Ajanta became a major center for Vajrayana sect. And perhaps some of you must have read, the people who know Marathi literature. There is a reference in Sthanapothi, in Chakradhara's Sthanapothi, which talks about the Siddhas engaged in some esoteric activity at Ellora. So perhaps the Vajrayana activity continued till 13th century, but it started sometime around 700, and perhaps now this is again a speculation that it was inspired by a mendicant called Sarahapa, who came to Ellora from Orissa. Now this as I said, this is just a speculation because we are not sure about the date of Sarahapa, but he came to Ellora. We have that much of reference, but relying on that reference, we may speculate that the activity was inspired by Sarahapa, and that gave a new life to the art activity at Ellora. Now this activity again had to rely on those hands which were not competent enough. Probably a large number of sculptures were already carved in cave number 11 and 12, like the ones which we saw earlier. And there was a lot of incomplete part also. Perhaps these lesser sculptors were employed to fill up those spaces, those empty spaces. And that is why I call them space filler guilds. These guilds are quite incompetent, and they have only done the job of filling those spaces. But from this space filling guild, there emerges a great master, and that precisely is the focus of this lecture. Now, this is what I call the space filler guild. You can see it for yourself that the quality is very bad. Though Ellora is highly praised for great sculpture, we must admit that a large number of sculpture at Ellora is quite below excellent. These are two sculptures from 11 and 12, and if you see the sculpture on the left, you can see the fall in the merit. The iconography is being followed very faithfully, because following iconography is never a problem. And then we shift to cave number 15. Now, cave number 15, as I said earlier, now this is, sometimes it becomes very difficult to address a large audience for various reasons. One of the reasons is there must be some people who are very well conversant with the problems of Ellora, and there must be some people who are not aware of these problems. So let me spell out some of the things, at least very briefly, to explain the further argument. This cave, though is multi-storied like 11 and 12, has only 2 stories, which means that, and it is at a height, which indicates that this cave is incomplete, and the 3rd floor, the ground floor, is yet to be carved. If you observe carefully on the pillar capitals of the upper floor, you can see the seated Buddha images, which leaves no doubt about its Buddhist origin. So, keeping this in mind, we'll try to understand this cave. This cave has a very, very curious feature that it has a huge Nandi Mandapa, a marvelous monolith in front of it. I personally feel that while carving this cave, and when the cave was left unfinished, a huge chunk, a huge boulder of rock must have been left unremoved from in front of this cave, which must have inspired the later carvers to convert it into a monolith, because it was already separated from all the sides. And this is that monolith, which popularly is known as Nandi Mandapa, but this is not a Nandi Mandapa. This is just it does not have any purpose, which itself suggests that this was an experiment. They tried to carve a monolith. They have tried to carve a very small monolith in cave number 22 also. There are attempts of monoliths in Akana-Madana caves, lower Akana-Madana caves. There are some monoliths found at Kharosa, very small monoliths, some monoliths at Undavalli. But this is the first successful complete monolith. And which you like, there are monoliths in Pallava region also. The Pancha Pandava Rathas are also monoliths. But they are carved from loose boulders. And the other thing is you cannot enter into those Rathas. They are pseudo buildings. They have only niches, not interiors. This has an interior. So when you see this monolith very carefully, the people who know something about Indian architecture will immediately be reminded of the Virupaksha temple of Patadakal. It is exactly like the Virupaksha temple. See the windows, see the sculptural program, see the udgamas, the entablature on top of those niches, and the ceiling. Everything is very, very similar to the Virupaksha temple of Patadakal. And here, there is a comparison. I think after seeing that, nobody will have any doubt about their analogy. If you compare the sculpture of Virupaksha temple with the sculpture of cave number 15, now the two sculptures on the left are from Virupaksha temple, the Mithuna sculptures, and on the right, even the lady, inebriated lady, being supported by a male, is a very common depiction in Virupaksha temple as well as in Badami. So this also you can trace its origin to Virupaksha temple. So after seeing all these things, I think one should not be left with any doubt about its connection with Virupaksha temple. Now, while talking about Virupaksha temple, we need to know a little more about that temple, which is not only attributed, but we know it for sure that that temple has been designed by two acharyas. One, there are two names mentioned in an inscription. One is Sarvasiddhi Acharya, and it says that he is from Tenkana Disha. Now there is another inscription found at Patadakal where we come across this word Tenkana Disha, which means the south. There the reference says that the sculpture on the south has been carved by that sculpture, so by that master, and that is why some of the art historians tend to believe that Sarvasiddhi Acharya is responsible for the southern wall of Virupaksha temple. I personally do not subscribe to this interpretation because I have a serious doubt whether the masters or the acharyas were handed over a particular side of the temple. Moreover, if you see Virupaksha temple, there is hardly any difference between the north side and the south side. I strongly feel that Tenkana Deshayam, so which means that he is the sculptor who came from the south, from Kanchipura. The other name which we come across is Gunda Anivaritachari. Gunda Anivaritachari, and both these sculptors have been decorated with the royal honor, which is known as Perjari. They have been honored, both of them, by the Patadakal court, because we know that Virupaksha temple and Mallikarjuna temple, both of them are both of them are. I'm sorry. I missed. Both. There's some problem. I'll go back. Okay.
You're visible. Voice is
So both these sculptors who have been mentioned in that inscription should be given the credit of it. Now, keeping this in mind, we'll go further. We'll see the sculpture of Virupaksha temple as well as cave number 15. Now, this particular Dwarapala, which is quite different than the Vakataka or the Kalachuri Dwarapala. The Kalachuri Dwarapalas are almost the counterparts of Padmapani Avalokiteshwar. Very calm, in repose, very composed. Against that, this Dwarapala is quite aggressive, is quite assertive. So I call it Veera Pratyahara, and I attribute it to Pallava dynasty, to Vishnukundian dynasty. I think it started from there. But in Patadakal and in cave number 15, you find the similar Dwarapalas. And in this particular case, you can see that the Dwarapala is not a part of the original program. A special niche has been provided to him. When we go inside the cave, there are many sculptures. We will not be able to see most of them, but we will pick up a few. Now, the sculpture on the left is from cave number 15, showing the combat between Hiranyakashipu and Narsimha. And you can see that see a very marked influence of dance tradition on that sculpture. Their legs are interlocked, their hands are raised like dancer, and the similar depiction can be found at Virupaksha temple in a very small sculpture which shows two warriors fighting with each other. See the legs, they too are interlocked, their hands are also raised in a similar fashion. So there is hardly any doubt that the sculpture has been borrowed from Virupaksha temple. In Virupaksha temple, there is a very interesting inscription which says that a person called Achala, who was an expert of Bharata's Natya Shastra, was appointed to guide the sculptors, which perhaps means that to add theatricality in this sculpture, they invited a person of theatre to help them. So let's keep this in mind. There are two more sculptures which can be attributed to the same guild from this cave. We may not be able to see all of them. I don't think it needs any comment. Everybody must have noticed that these sculptures can be attributed to that space filler guild from cave number 11 and 12. So this must be the local guild who have been working over here. A large number of sculptures in this cave are in this style, and they are so naively carved, so incompetently carved, that in this particular sculpture, which shows marriage of Shiva and Parvati, you can see that the sculptor could not handle the relative proportions of these two figures, and that is why he made Parvati to stand on a platform to reach the height of Shiva. Now, this is the kind of sculpture which we see over here. But to our great surprise, there are two great sculptures that are seen in this particular cave. One is of Nataraja, and the other is Tripurantaka. Now, if you see carefully, there is some consanguinity between this sculpture, which is very lesser in quality, and these sculptures too, which perhaps means that a great master, a highly gifted sculptor from the same guild, who perhaps is more ambitious, who perhaps has better vision, is trying to excel himself. Now, it's difficult to believe that a sculpture of this quality comes from the blues. You cannot relate this sculpture to any of the traditions. If you try to trace it to Pattadakal, there is no similarity between Pattadakal sculpture and these sculptures. Not to Kanchipuram, not to Kalachuri sculpture, not to Andhra sculpture, because I believe that there is some contribution of Andhra sculptors and architects also to this monument. But surprisingly, you cannot relate these sculptures to any of these traditions. And if you see carefully, there is some similarity. There is some family lineage that can be traced to this space filler guild, which means that this sculptor perhaps comes from the same tradition, from the same lineage. When I told you that we were working on a book on the unknown masters, and my co-author Kanika Gupta, she examined each and every sculpture of the early date very carefully, and then we realized that the lineage of this sculpture can be traced back to cave number 12. This is one of the images from cave number 12, and we strongly feel that this is from the later phase of Buddhist sculpture in Ellora, which shows a lot of similarity with the rest of the sculpture. But if you see it very carefully, you'll realize that it doesn't follow the same language. It doesn't follow the same dynamics. I'm giving an example of a sculpture which many of you have not seen, but if you get an opportunity, you can see the photograph. There is a great sculpture called Walking Man by Rodin. In that, the balance of the body is such that you feel that he will step forward the next moment. Something similar has been observed by this sculptor, and the similar dynamics are found in this minor sculpture. This is quite an insignificant sculpture. But if you study it very carefully, it seems that he has exploited all those qualities further, and he has created these two masterpieces. Now, there is one more observation of my colleague, that he mixes two rasas in this sculpture. There is a beautiful sculpture of Jogeshwari. Now, can you see the lower right corner? A ferocious image of Jogeshwari collecting the blood of Andhakasura in a skull cap is placed over there. And the relationship between Shiva and Yogeshwari is so beautifully delineated, so beautifully rendered. So a very curious combination of Sringara and Bhayanak can be seen over here. So we kept this mind and went further. And now we will have to rush through this presentation because we have to address so many other things. Now this is Kailashanatha. I'm sure almost all of you have seen it before. Now the outer wall of Kailasha is quite incongruous to the other sculptures. It's very interesting that the iconography of these sculptures is very similar to the sculptures from the main shrine. But stylistically, these sculptures are quite different than the rest of the sculpture. Let's try to find out the reasons at a later juncture. When you enter into the sculpture, before entering into the sculpture, let's have a look to the architecture of this monument, because that too is a very important factor. And for those who have not visited this monument, the height of this temple is almost 90 to 95 feet. That is a 10-storied building carved from a single rock. Now this obviously is imported from the southern part of this country. It is a typical South Indian Vimana with a very heavy Shukanasa or very heavy Nasika. And that is why it is believed that either it is influenced by the Virupaksha temple of Patadakal or the Kailashanatha temple of Kanchipuram. There is a big debate about it. If you examine these architectures and also the interiors of these architectures, you will realize that though there is a lot of similarity between all the three structures, the interior is radically different. Virupaksha temple and Kailashanatha of Kanchipuram are like aisles and a central nave. This temple is a Navaranga Mandapa, a square with 4 clusters of pillar in 4 corners. It is quite differently conceived. So this is not simply a simulation of the earlier prototypes, but a new interpretation of those prototypes. And what does it borrow from those 2 structures should be examined. This is Virupaksha temple of Patadakal. The pillar which you see on the left is the victory pillar, which tells us that Virupaksha temple was erected by Lokamahadevi, and Mallikarjuna temple was erected by Lokamahadevi, and it was to commemorate, to celebrate the Chalukyan victory over the Pallavas. Now see, there is a lot of similarity between this structure and Kailashanatha of Ellora. I would draw your attention to the heavy Shukanasa in this structure also, and a very austere superstructure. The stupi is different. This stupi has only 4 corners. This is an octagonal stupi, and this is Kailashanatha of Kanchipuram. Now you can see that here the superstructure is quite ornate, unlike the other 2. And the stupi is round. Another thing is the verticality and horizontality of these temples. This temple has greater horizontality compared to the other 2 structures. So keeping these few things in mind, we can reach to a very broad contention that the Pallava Acharya came from Kanchi, because there is an inscription found as Peddavaduguru, which says that an Achari, Pallava Achari, came to Patadakal and worked at Patadakal. We come across this name, Sarvasiddhi Acharya, and it says that he came from south. So it is quite possible that the Achari, who is not named in the Peddavaduguru inscription, could be Sarvasiddhi himself. Now this is a very broad contention, but I think there is no harm focusing on specific names, because I don't think India had many masters of this caliber, this cadre at that juncture. So let's assume that Sarvasiddhi Acharya is the Acharya who came from Pallava region and worked at Patadakal, who has been mentioned in this inscription. So, and because he came from South India and was assisted by another great sculptor from Patadakal, this did not remain an imitation of the earlier structure, there were many new things added to it. Now see, this Gunda Anivaratachari and his guild, along with Sarvasiddhi. Now let's assume that Gundaya and Sarvasiddhi Acharya, both of them traveled towards Ellora. There is one more name which is found in this inscription, who is the disciple of Sarvasiddhi Acharya. His name is Rewadi Ovacha. Now, the temple on which Rewadi Ovacha has worked, Papanatha temple, is quite different architecturally and sculpturally. You do not find any similarity with those sculptures in Ellora, and that is why the possibility of Rewadi Ovacha traveling to Ellora can be eliminated. Let's assume that Gunda Anivaratachari and Sarvasiddhi, they came to cave number 15, showed their skills there, and started working at 16. Now, this is another very interesting similarity between Virupaksha temple and Kailashnath temple, the Gajathara, very elaborate Gajathara and a very animated Gajathara. Unfortunately, I could not find the best of the photographs from Ellora where you can find similar gesture of elephants and the Shardulas fighting with each other. Now we know that the best of the elephants have been carved either at Sanchi in the earlier period or in the southern part, mainly at in the Pallava sites. It is quite likely that the Acharya and the guild who came from Pallava region must have carved the Gajathara of Pattarakal temple also. Because in the other temples, you do not find such a beautiful depiction of elephants. So I will not hesitate to attribute some parts of this temple to the Pallava carvers. And perhaps the same part in Ellora Kailashnath can attribute it to the Pallava guild. Now here the size has increased so much, you can see that human figure and imagine the size of the Gajathara. Now the other sculptures, left is Virupaksha, right is, we will rush through these similarities because there are so many similarities that perhaps I'll need the whole hour just to point out these similarities. But again, here the sculpture is almost relieved from the wall. This is another similarity which you can observe. Only in Virupaksha temple, the Dwarapalas or the Pratyaharas, they are almost converted into round sculptures. They are stuck to the wall, but they are not relief sculptures. You can see the same quality in the central sculpture. It is a round sculpture which is attached to the wall. Again, the Pratyaharas are so similar, they don't need any further justification. And then, the upper register of this temple. The upper register, we know that there is a huge Gajathara, and the shrine proper, on the outer wall of the proper shrine, there is a series of sculptures, which is some of the most interesting sculptures of Kailashnath. Now these sculptures show a marked similarity, and not only that, a marked lineage of Pattarakal. Pattarakal sculpture has some specific qualities. As I mentioned earlier, that Pattarakal sculpture, the Virupaksha temple had appointed an expert of Bharata's Natya Shastra to advise the sculptors. And you can see that there is a tremendous theatricality in Pattarakal sculpture. I have been talking about it since years. I'll try to repeat it in a few minutes. That in theatricality, the performer is aware of the onlooker. They are almost performing for the audience. If you see the Gupta sculptures are least bothered about the audience. They are engrossed in themselves. This sculpture is quite exhibitionist. They are almost performing for the viewer, performing for the onlooker. And this quality we saw in cave number 15 also. If you remember that Narasimha sculpture, it was a performance. Even in this, it looks like a performance. They don't appear as if they are after each other's life. The same is true about this Ravan who is killing Jatayu. Now here Jatayu is almost tickling Ravana, and Ravana is coming heavily on him. But the whirling figure, the way it has been placed diagonally, it goes closer to theatre rather than war. And something similar can be found in Virupaksha temple also. This arrested movement, this suspended movement is a very specific quality of patriarchal sculpture, and which continues in this upper register also. Let's go a little faster. The sculpture on the right, to underline my point, the influence of Nrutta. I always say that if you really want to understand the aesthetics of Chalukyan sculpture, the Nrutta Sutra would help you better than the Chitra Sutra. There are two appendices of Vishnu Dharmottara. One is Chitra Sutra, which talks about the visual arts, and the other is Nrutta Sutra. But Indian art can be understood much better in the light of Nrutta Sutra than Chitra Sutra. This theatricality is a part of patriarchal idiom, and it is continued in Ellora also. This is almost a copy of the patriarchal sculpture. Now the question rises over here that if the patriarchal sculpture is so evolved in cave number 15, when we saw that sculpture, Narasimha and Hiranyakashipu, it was so evolved. It was at its meridian. How come the sculpture in cave number 16 is lesser than that, or a little unevolved than that? The possibility is now the second generation of patriarchal sculptors have started working over here. These sculptors must be younger sculptors working under Gondacharya. This is the ceiling sculpture from Ellora as well as patriarchal. The Prishta Swastika Nataraja, the flexion, is another quality of patriarchal sculpture. You find beautiful Nataraja images in early phase of Ellora, in cave number 14, in cave number 21, and they are as elegant and as engrossing as these two. But there is no body flexion. They are quite frontal. This flexion is a new element which has been added in this particular period. And a marvelous depiction of Mahishamardini. Now see, it is almost, the sculpture on the left is a round sculpture from patriarchal. On the right, it is almost a relief version of the same sculpture. See the pose of the demon. I think it has been carved by the same guild. There should not be any doubt about it. See the posture of the hands. She is almost declaring, it is a war cry. It is almost a victory cry. After overpowering the demon, the goddess is posing on her kill. She is posing on her victim. Now, this is the theatricality which I am talking about. Now, there is another element which you can see. There is a small panel of Mahishasura-Mardini in Virupaksha temple, which is stylistically quite different, the one on the left. If you compare the sculpture on the right with the sculpture from patriarchal, you will realize that it follows exactly the same iconographic program and postures. But the style is very different. And I think this is very, very significant, because if you compare this sculpture, the lower right sculpture is from Ellora and this one is from Mahabalipuram. If you see the surface treatment, if you see the carving techniques, if you see the blind background, inert background, you will immediately notice that stylistically it is much closer to Pallava sculpture, and iconographically it is closer to Chalukyan sculpture. So it is a blend of two lineages which you see in Ellora. This proves that the Pallavas and the Chalukyas, both traditions can be seen in Ellora. And they are intermingling with each other. They are blending with each other. These are some of the carvings which show similarity with Pallava sculpture. I will have to go a little faster. talking about Ellora and Kailashanatha in particular in 50 minutes or 60 minutes is almost an impossibility. Now, we are entering into the rear veranda of Kailashanatha. In the rear veranda, you can see that there is a lot of sculpture which is iconographically very, very interesting, but aesthetically very poor. Now, I'm sure many of you must have immediately come to a conclusion that these sculptures have been carved by that guild, the Space Fillers Guild. These sculptures are very different. You can see some very imaginative depictions in this veranda, including some marvelous sculptures like Parvati Parinaya, where you can see Shiva in a very nervous mood, offering his hand to Parvati instead of accepting her hand. But the quality of the sculpture is much lesser. This is another sculpture. I could have shown you so many of them, but I think we'll have to leave some time to draw the conclusions. And now we come to one of the masterpieces of Indian sculpture, the Master of Andhakasura. We, in the book which we published recently, which is known as Lupadakhe. Lupadakhe is Rupadaksha, the artist. In that book, we have proposed that this master perhaps comes from cave number 15. Now, the hypothesis which I put forward long back in my first book on Ellora, I proposed that cave number 15, which was left incomplete, was used by Danti Durga as a laboratory. When he wanted to take up such an ambitious project, he obviously wanted to appoint the best of the sculptors. And the best sculptors were not available at Ellora. We could see that the sculptural tradition of Ellora was in doldrums. And naturally, he had to invite people from outside. Before handing over the monument to them, he wanted to test their competence. And those people were asked to show their competence in cave number 15. That explains the inconsistency of style in cave number 15. All those people coming from different lineages carved their sculptures over there. There is no specific program in cave number 15. In other caves, you can see a proper program. Cave number 15 doesn't have any program. So they showed their skills, and some of them were selected for the shrine proper, for the main project. So perhaps Danti Durga was most pleased by the skills of the patriarchal sculptors. Perhaps now I dare to make a proposal over here that it could be Gunda Anivaratachari. So Gunda Anivaratachari could have been the chief architect of Kailashanatha, who was assisted by his Pallava counterpart, and the local sculptors also were given some job. The people who could not prove their competence perhaps later on worked in the veranda, which obviously is a later addition to the shrine proper, but the master whom we discovered in cave number 15, that master perhaps was handed over a few great sculptures, and this sculpture is one of them. Now, when I talked about blending two rasas or blending two moods in a single sculpture, the same can be observed over here. Now, this is, I'm sure the people who visited Ellora with me, they must have heard it from me earlier also, that here Shiva, in his Ghora mood, in his Ghora form, is in a ferocious mood. His disheveled hair, his hands engaged in the most gory activities. Now, 7 of his hands are engaged in those activities. He has pulled out one of the limbs of Andhakasura. He's skinning Gajasura. He's stretching the skin of Gajantaka. And obviously, Parvati, who is witnessing this act, is frightened, is shaken. And Shiva, being the perennial lover, he notices that mood, and he's trying to solace Parvati. See the lowermost left hand of Shiva, who is trying to tap Parvati's cheek, assuring her that she should not get she should not get shaken by this form. It is not for her. So this combination of Sthayi Bhava and Abhichari Bhava, which perhaps comes from Natya Shastra, can be seen in this sculpture also. If you observe, I will not I don't have enough time to point out every detail of this sculpture and compare it with the sculpture from cave number 15. But you can see that the torso, the other physiological and anatomical details match with those two sculptures. And we very strongly feel that this sculpture must be attributed to the same master from cave number 15. Now this grandeur, this flamboyance, which is introduced to Indian sculpture for the first time. Now I always say that this is the beginning, this is the inauguration of Baroque in Indian art. The classical period is over. The repose of classicism is over, and now it is entering into the flamboyant phase of Baroque sculpture. The grandeur is there, the theatricality is there. So here is a great master who introduced that. Of course, it was introduced in Pattakal itself. The theatricality was introduced, but the grandeur is being introduced at Ellora, and which culminates into another masterpiece, which can be rated as one of the greatest sculptures ever carved in the history of sculpture in the world. Now, the people who have seen this sculpture don't need any further justification. It's a huge sculpture. The people who have not seen it must know that it is perhaps more than 16 to 18 feet, where Ravana is shown shaking Kailash. And in the upper register, you can see Parvati clinging to Shiva. There is a very interesting suggestion that Shiva always regarded Ravana as one of his his dearest disciple, not only because Ravana proved his loyalty to Shiva, but also because of Ravana. The lady who normally is portrayed as a very upright, independent person, Parvati, she got frightened and clung to Shiva, probably for the first time. So it happened because of Ravana, and that is why Shiva has a very soft corner for Ravana, because he is instrumental in getting his lady close to him. Now, this emotive charge, we talk about the sculptural language, we talk about Abhida, Vyanjana, Abhida, Lakshana and Vyanjana, the straightforward, simple principal meaning, the metaphorical meaning, and the meaning which is loaded with emotions. Here, we can see that the sculpture is entering into that phase where the sculpture has several layers. It gives you different experiences every time you see it. Kshanai kshanaya navatam upayati tadiya rupam ramaniyataya. So this gives you different experiences, and the art of sculpture reaches its pinnacle in this sculpture. A lot can be said about Ellora. As I said, that we are trying to trace back the origin of Ellora to a certain group of artists, because we always feel, both of us, me and my co-author, that the sculptors in India have faced tremendous injustice. So now, let's not forget that what we study is art history. The art part of it and the artist part of it does deserve greater attention, and let's try to pay it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kannal. I now open the chat for all so that you can put the questions publicly in chat. And sure. I request Dr. Prachi Moghe to kindly moderate the questions and ask those questions to Dr. Deepak Kannal. And we are on time. We have half an hour.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Kannal, for a brilliant lecture, very insightful. We all are really indebted to you. I request all the participants to type the questions. Here I am not able to see earlier questions. There is only one question which I am seeing right now, but I think it is a very tricky question. Does the iconography here or elsewhere show how the Buddhists were treated by the Hindus?
Why iconography? I think even the architecture and the rest of the cultural styles. But at the same time, I think there is no need to read too much. Sometimes we tend to overread in art. I personally feel, I do believe that I'm not trying to deny the sectarian rivalry in Indian history as well as in Indian art. But in this particular monument, I can see that the Buddhist activity almost came to a seizure, and then it has been taken off. It is, I wonder whether it was forcibly taken over, at least at this monument. Because cave number 15 was obviously an incomplete cave. The same can be said about cave number 27 also. Cave number 27 is also an incomplete cave. And the sculpture is Buddhist, the architecture is Buddhist, the sculpture is Pranali. Iconographically, there is not much of a change, because if you compare the Yogeshwara Shiva in the Nandi Mandapa, under the Nandi Mandapa, with the seated Buddha images, Dhani Buddha images from cave number 12, you'll realize that that there is a marked similarity, stylistic similarity between the two. The same is true about Aurangabad sculpture and Ellora sculpture.
Yeah. Thank you. There is another very interesting question, that where were some of the carvings completed by Space Filler Guild and not the actual sculptor who started it?
Yes, it's quite likely. I do believe that. Of course, they too were sculptors. I will not say that they were not sculptors, but they were lesser sculptors. I call them space filler guilds because the spaces which were left undone were dealt by them.
Yeah. What were the tools that were used to carve?
To carve out the big chunks of rock, they have used drills, hand drills. And if you go to the quarries, even today, the same technique is used. If you happen to go to Ellora, go to the top of Kailash Nath, and there you will find the drill marks on top of it. So they drill, they make drills in a row, and then by putting pegs into it, they hammer all the pegs at the same time. So the big chunk comes out of the rock, and then it is rolled down. For the sculpture, there is no other tool than hammer and the chisel. The Pallava sculptors seem to have used a bush hammer. A bush hammer is a hammer which has many spikes on its head. So when you beat the stone with the bush hammer, it creates a certain kind of texture. It gives a kind of grained texture, which is seen at Mahabalipuram, and the same texture can be seen in the sculpture of Mahishasura Mardini in Kailash Nath.
Thank you. Is there any evidence to suggest that the sculptures and the panels were painted over, like most of temples in South Indian style?
Please repeat the question.
Is there any evidence to suggest that the sculptures and the panels were painted over, like most of the temples in South Indian style?
Yes, certainly. At least the Brahmanical sculpture in cave number 15, you can see a thick layer of vajra on some of the sculptures. It seems that after applying that thick layer of white paste, they used to decorate that sculpture and then paint over it. And if you have visited Ellora, you must have seen some reminiscences of painting in the Nandi Mandapa, in the Mukha Mandapa of Kailash Nath. There are 3 layers of painting, which means that it was repeatedly painted and finally painted during the period of Ahilyabai Holkar.
Some attribute Ellora Kailash temple to Chalukya kings and not Rashtrakutas. Your view on this?
Why I insisted on working on individual artists, right since last 2020. I always feel that we are giving too much of an importance to the dynasties. It is the artist who makes the art, not the dynasties. So who pays for it is not very important. But here it is quite clear that the Rashtrakutas have spent on it. The Rashtrakutas have patronized it, because it is right in the period of Rashtrakutas. It is in the period when the Chalukyan reign was over. And the Siddhamshri copper plate, which is in the Baroda collection now, clearly attributes that monument to not only to Rashtrakutas but Krishna.
There is another question. Was Kokka's economic ancestor? Some inscriptions record their ancestral lineage from Kokasa. He is regarded as Vishwakarma.
It's
Was
actually-
Kokasa a historical sculptor?
I don't know who has asked this question.
Yeah, Soumitra Majumdar.
It's a rather, if you are interested, you can look through a book recently published by R.N. Mishra. Even I wanted to work on this topic, but I was perhaps too lazy to work hard on it. Kokasa, this name keeps coming repeatedly in several different texts. Long back, Dr. Jamkhedkar wrote about it, which appeared in Vasudhaiva Hindi. I personally feel that Kokasa must be a family, because Kokasa is mentioned in 6th century, is mentioned in 9th century, is mentioned. So a person cannot work for 500 years. So it could be a family or it could be a lineage. We do not know. Of course, this is a very, very broad speculation. But Kokasa does call for greater attention. And please look through that book. You will enjoy it. It is called Shilpa by Ramanath Mishra. Long back, he wrote a small book called Ancient Indian Art and Art Activity. And he expanded it further, in which he has discussed about Kokasa at length.
Oh, thank you. Any plans or drawings were found in the Ellora site?
Plans?
Plans, yeah, architectural plans, cave plan.
Not exactly. Not exactly. There are some scribblings which we but not exactly for that.
Yeah, 1 minute. Is there any sculpture on common activities of people during those days?
Sculpture?
On common activities of people during those days.
I'm sorry.
But we do not have, sir, any evidence for common man who are in active part of this Ellora.
You mean the patronage of laity?
Yeah, patronage, not of laity, but their participation even as an artist. Or I think Medha Tapiawala wants to say that from whether this occupation or art, it was a hereditary occupation, and it is not just as a hobby.
No,
right?
It was an occupation.
Yeah.
There are also references of land grants to artists,
Yes.
payments, all of these guilds.
Yes.
I can refer to the same book, which talks about the guild hierarchies, their remuneration. All those things are very clearly mentioned over there. So this cannot be a hobby. The Latant cannot create such monuments.
Yeah, exactly.
This is highly sophisticated, highly technical. But about the patronage, I think at least till 7th, 8th century, we do not find a common man's patronage to Brahmanical activity, Hindu activity, as against the Buddhist activity, which was mainly patronized by the common man. I think only after the establishment of mathas, which can be traced back to 7th century, the involvement of common man can be traced in the creative activity.
Okay. 1 minute. Are the Jain sculptures are two carved and designed by same sculptors, and are they different stylistically?
Somebody asked this question to me a few days back. Normally, the Jain caves are kept at a very late date, and the two inscriptions which have been found, unfortunately, there are no inscriptions barring that Danti Durga inscription on the Nandi Mandapa. There are no inscriptions elsewhere, but there are two inscriptions found in Jain caves. One of them attributes it to a particular sculptor. It says Nagavarma Kruta Pratima, and the other is Sohila Brahmacharinam. So these two inscriptions, on the basis of these two inscriptions, the Jain caves are kept in 11th century or at 1100 by some of them. I think that we tend to forget the Chota Kailash. Chota Kailash can be treated as a link between Kailash Nath and the Jain caves. If you see the later activity at Kailash Nath, the Paralanka and Lankeshwar, particularly Lankeshwar. Lankeshwar caves shows marked similarity with the Jain caves, which perhaps means that with a very brief hiatus, the sculptural activity must have continued in Chota Kailash, and then it extended for in the Jain caves. The Jain caves must have been extended much later, and these images which we are talking about must have been carved at a later stage, because initially I think all the caves were independent caves, and in the later juncture they were extended, expanded, and reconnected. The connection between the caves is very tentative. So the activity in Jain caves must have continued for a fairly long time. It can be seen in continuation of Kailash.
There are repeated questions on, please do elaborate on the different levels of meaning in the last slide.
Different levels of?
Meaning in the last slide. You showed the last slide and you discussed about the different levels.
What I was trying to say that sometimes sculptures are like illustrations. They only depict the subject matter, and it explains the content of the sculpture to the spectator. But a great sculpture does not stop over there. It offers you so many things which the text cannot offer you, the story cannot offer. And that is the emotive part of it, because the word does not have that feeling. The form has. So this sculpture gives a tremendous emotive charge, because there is a lot of emotion in this sculpture. That the audacity of Ravana, which can be expressed. Now, if you see, each sculpture is loaded with different emotion. Ravana is so audacious. If you look at Shiva, Shiva is most unperturbed, because he has all confidence in his might. So he's least bothered. But Parvati is frightened. Parvati is clinging to him. There is a Dasi which is running away from the scene. And if you see it very carefully, you can see her necklace flying in the air. Now, all those different moods are woven together so beautifully that the total mood of the sculpture gives you a very, very complex experience. This is called Vyanjana. Vyanjana is multiple meanings. Vyanjana is polyphony of language. It doesn't stop only at one meaning. It gives you layers of meaning. That's what I was talking
about. There is another, as Kailasnath temple was carved from top downward, what about the Gopuram? How much parts of Kailasa was pre-planned?
There is a big controversy about the original plan of Kailasha, and some of the scholars are of the opinion that the Gajathara is a later addition. The Gajathara was not a part of original plan. I cannot subscribe to this contention at all, because we tend to forget that there are two huge Dhwajastambhas in front of the temple. Now, if you try to imagine the temple only up to Gajathara, then the Dhwajastambha will be half the Dhwajastambha. And if you see the Nandi Mandapa very carefully, there are similar Dhwajastambhas at the corner of the, and they are complete. Which means that the design of the Dhwajastambha was preconceived, and the same design was repeated in the actual Dhwajastambha. That very clearly indicates that the Gajathara was the part of original design. They also said that there was a bridge between Paralanka and the central shrine. You can see that the Ardhamandapa does not have the outer wall. And you can also see the traces of that bridge, which perhaps collapsed. And Ravana shaking Kailash is also a later idea, which was added much later. But I think I do agree with this contention that Ravana shaking Kailash was added later, but not much later. It may not be a part of the original plan, but it was added immediately after the collapse of the bridge.
Can you please elaborate little about the sculptors or artists carving small Ramayana Mahabharat panels at outer wall of mandapas at Kailash?
It's so sad. Yeah. Now, it's practically impossible to pay attention to every sculpture of. We did not talk about Yajnashala. We did not talk about River Goddess Shrine. We did not talk about Lankeshwar. I'm sorry, but yes, the panels are very important. And you know that normally the Mahabharata panels are on the north, the Ramayana panels are on the south. If you happen to go to Virupaksha temple, these panels is one more evidence of the Virupaksha influence on Ellora. Because in Virupaksha temple, you will find similar narrative panels on the pillars. These panels are, we know that unlike the other avataras, when we portray avataras, the rest of the avataras have one mission to accomplish. Like in Matsyavatara, he saved the earth and his job was over. In Varaha Avatara, he fought with Hiranyaksha and his job was over. Only in Krishnavatara and Ramavatara, they had so many things and they lived a full life. So naturally, you cannot select a single episode from their life to depict that avatar. And obviously, they are converted into Krishna Leela panels and the Ramayana panels. And when you want to show the whole story, the narrative has to be synoptic. The narrative has to be simplified. The sculptural quality of these panels cannot be compared with the rest of the sculpture because the size is very small. As I said, that these sculptures do not have any emotive charge on them. They are like illustrations.
Thank you. There is another question. Exactly what is the connection between Vaishnava Buddhist and Pashupata caves at Ellora?
The carvers were not Buddhists or Jain or Hindu. Carvers were carvers. So the carver is the connection between all these caves. They are the people who created the caves, whether Buddhist or Jain. I have pointed out a particular sculpture in many of my writing. There is a beautiful panel of Parvati Parinay in cave number 21. And you can see the procession, marriage procession of Shiva at the base of that panel. The same procession is repeated in cave number 10 in Vishwakarma cave. If you happen to go to the first floor, in the Udgama of cave number, on the right Udgama of cave number 10, you will find the same, exactly the same panel carved over there. It doesn't have any direct relevance. But the sculptors, they use these patterns in different places.
Yes. Thank you. Is there any symbols found which is associated with sculptors group? Because some of the ancient monument contains sculptor symbols.
Yes. Unfortunately, Ellora, Badami has many. Are you talking about the carver's marks?
Yeah, carver's marks or any symbol.
In Ellora, they are not.
Yeah, thank you.
In Badami, you find them in abundance.
Yes. I think almost all questions are done. I have skipped one or two general questions. If you allow, I will ask these questions.
Yes.
Was there Lakulish sculptures in Ellora, Kailashnath?
Oh yes, so many. Actually, didn't I tell that I had to rush through? I also showed one of them.
Yeah.
In Mahakuta, it is called Shiva Lingin, but it is Lakulisha with a club in his hand and who is Ethitheli. On the southern wall, very close to the Mukha Mandapa, on the corner of Mukha Mandapa, where you find a pillar of colossal order. Right next to that pillar, you find a standing Lakulisha, which is identified as Shiva Lingin in Pattarakal, but it is Lakulisha. There are Lakulisha sculptures elsewhere also in cave on the facade of cave number 21. You find a Lakulisha image. There is a large Lakulisha image in cave number 29 also.
Yes. We say heritage sites of historical significance in a very dilapidated condition. So can public-private partnership be an answer to restoration and also for promoting heritage tourism in India?
I wonder whether I'm competent to answer this question. But yes, patronage from the public will certainly help. But I would very strongly warn that the common people must not venture into this area. They may help Archaeological Survey of India by making donations because there is a very strong possibility of ruining the monuments, which has happened in some of the cases. If the common people try to renovate it, there is a philosophy of renovation, not only the technology. that philosophy has to be followed.
Is there any evidence that Kailas was ever an active temple that the local populace or maybe only the royals or elite worshipped at Kailas?
No. I think there is a very clear evidence that unlike Ajanta, Kailash was never forgotten. It has been mentioned, and even people say that famous Ovi of Jnaneshwar, Chintecha Pani, that Kutakavya, Adhikara Samaga Payare, was inspired by Kailashnath. Let's forget that. But since Ahilyabai Holkar has tried to renovate it and has given grants to it, very clearly indicated that it was a living temple and was accessible to common people.
Can we say that the Natya Shastra concept was more influenced by the sculptures back then?
Your sound is breaking, madam.
Can we say that the Natya Shastra concept was more influenced by the sculptures back then?
It's difficult to say so, because when Natya Shastra was compiled, there was very little sculpture in India, and whatever was there, a large body of it, large corpus of it was Buddhist sculpture, which was not very theatrical. India had a tradition, but I can say one thing, that the notion of Riti, you know that there are several theories of aesthetics, and Riti, which is propounded by scholars like Dandi, Bhamaha and Vaman, you see a very marked influence of visual arts on the Riti concept. Not on Natya Shastra, but this particular theory, you see an influence of visual arts. And there is also an evidence to believe that Bhamaha and Dandi, both of them, have some basic training in visual arts. They have undergone some formal training in visual arts.
It is said that Aurangabad caves are carved before the Ellora caves.
Yes.
In Aurangabad caves, we see Buddha sitting in Ganesha Sabha. Please explain.
Buddha sitting in?
Ganesha Sabha.
Oh no, that is a later addition. Are you talking about the Saptamatrika kind of? The actual main corpus of Aurangabad sculpture is earlier to Ellora.
What is the significance of Shardul, which we can see in Gajathara?
I think there is no specific prescription for having Shardula and Gaja together. This is an imagination of the sculptor to make it more dynamic. But otherwise, Shardulas and Vyalas have a different place. We know that they mainly are used as the structural requirements. And Dr. Dhaki has written extensively on Vyalas, and he thinks that they are personification of waters, gushing waters. And most of the Vyala figures in the northern temples, Nagara temples, are in the Salilantar, in the recessions. There are protrusion and recessions. The Vyalas are normally put, or sometimes they are used as brackets. But since Vyalas and Shardulas are found long back, much before the Brahmanical sculpture, go to Nasik. Dr. Dev has written about these composite animals. They are seen in Bharut. They are seen in Buddhist art. So, in most of the cases, they are used as decorative patterns. Sometimes they have some metaphorical. They are used in various levels, various contexts.
Any suggestion showing that some Sanskrit text or Purana was used as the base for these sculptures, or it was all based on popular stories?
Puranas, in Vishnu Dharmottara Purana, there is a section which is known as Pratima Lakshana. Now the prescriptions of Pratima Lakshana are broadly followed by the sculptors, but they do not stop over there. Like I always compare it with the notion of raga. The prescription of raga is there, the chalan of raga is there, but still every singer has his own way of rendition. So the rendition differs. though they keep loyal to the prescription. Similarly, the prescriptions given by these texts, by the Shilpa text, are followed by the sculptors, but they don't stop over there. They have their own revisions.
There is another question. Is there a similarity between Shaila Gruha of Natya Shastra and Nandi Mandapa?
No, I don't think so. The Kutambalam seen in the South Indian architecture is compared with by some of the scholars, but I don't think I'm competent to give a very concluding reply to this. But Nandi Mandapa, no, because Nandi Mandapa does not have very specific descriptions.
Are there any evidences of an art school like systems to train the sculptors and artists to maintain the lineage and quality?
Yes, there are guilds. Again, I'll ask you to refer to the same text by R.N. Mishra, who talks that there are so many. Saraswati Gana is one of the names which is always mentioned. I talked about Ovajja. In South India, we find so many guilds which have this. So in a guild, a person enters into the lowermost level, like as a carver, as a mason. And then with the training, he gradually rises to different stages. He can become a Vardhagi, then he can become a Rupakara, and finally the same person may rise to the level of Sutradhar. So the formal training is there, and the rewards of formal training are also there.
Is there any connection between Krishneshwar temple and caves?
Between?
Krishneshwar temple and Aurangabad caves and Ellora caves.
Krishneshwar temple is much later. It is 18th century. But Krishneshwar temple has some very interesting sculpture which has contemporary references. It doesn't follow the iconography on the outer walls is followed, but stylistically there is no similarity. Even the interpretation of iconography is quite different. There are some contemporary topics which have been depicted on the pillars of Krishneshwar. So Krishneshwar cannot be seen in the context of Ellora. They believe that the Tirtha at Krishneshwara existed even in the ancient times, but the temple certainly didn't.
Yes. Okay. Anand, is there any question?
Shall we conclude?
Yeah. Sir, many people have asked about the book name which you were referring to. So I have written about Lupadekhe.
Lupadekhe.
Yeah, I have given them that one. And is there any other book you would like them to refer?
Can you give me half a second? I can. It has been published by a Delhi publisher called Mandala Publication. Lupadekhe, the master sculptors of ancient Indian. Just a minute, let me recollect. And written by myself and my student Kanika Gupta. I can just show the book to you. It is. I think it is available online on the site of Mandala Publications.
Okay.
Any other question?
I think there are many questions. People are also saying that they want to know more about it, but the time is limited. They want to know more about Ellora, and as you rightly said, 1 hour or 1 hour and a half is not enough to know about this hundreds of years of history.
You couldn't find it?
Yeah, Kanika Gupta ma'am is there with us, and she has typed the names on chat for all of us.
Acha,
Thank you, ma'am.
She's in the audience? Good.
Yeah, she's in the audience.
And perhaps she will give you the other information also.
Yeah. So, Prachi ma'am?
I think we should conclude now, because though there are few more questions, it is almost 11:28, right?
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. We thank you from bottom of heart. It's really very, very enlightening and insightful lecture. Thanks a lot. So, yes, sir.
This is the book.
Yeah.
And please remember one thing, that when you speak in such a synoptic manner, there are so many statements which are slightly overstatements. If I write about them, I will write it differently. So, because I'm addressing to a group in which quite a few people are not conversant with the concepts and the facts of artistry.
Yes.
So, if you want to know more about Ellora, try to read about it, not only listen.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, and thank you for this wonderful journey in 1 hour only. And many participants are now attracted more towards Ellora, and I thank you for taking it from your schedule and delivering this lecture. Thank you.
Thank you.
So see you all. Thank you.